Morgan Pechma, Editor-in-Chief of City and State, and this is Last Look. Today, our guest is City and State columnist and former Assemblyman Michael Benjamin. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, thank you.
In your most recent column for City and State, you write about the Trayvon Martin case, and you say that President Obama really missed an opportunity to open a dialogue about race in this country. Do you think that through this current mayoral race, we're having any type of discussion about race?
Not really, other than discussing stop-and-frisk as being unconstitutional, imposition on black men and Latinos. We haven't. To me, stop-and-frisk has been about crime prevention, and yes, it's occurred in black neighborhoods, Hispanic neighborhoods, but it hasn't happened on the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side or Bensonhurst or Bay Ridge. They're not stopping black men in white neighborhoods, they're stopping black boys and young men in crime-ridden black neighborhoods as a way of trying to tamp down on gun violence, tamp down on other types of crime. It's been overused because when you have to fill out 250s, as bureaucracies operate, once you have to do a form, it's something they could then use as productivity. And then I think it escalates into where you're stopping people because you have to come back to your lieutenant showing that I'm working.
I
eat the quotas, exactly.
Yeah, and it's interesting through our 5-borough ballot series, we've spoken to people in the housing projects in Brooklyn and in Mott Haven and the Bronx. And there are a lot of neighborhood residents who do support stop and frisk. Mm-hmm. And it seems like, this kind of political football that's being played here, mm-hmm. that it's not necessarily the people who are in the areas that are most affected by stop and frisk who are the most indignant about it. I mean,
yes.
Do you think that's accurate?
Unless you're a young man who stopped, who really hasn't done anything, you're somebody's grandson who doesn't want to see his or her grandson or grandchild or son stopped, that becomes a bit of a problem. But it really hasn't been about race. And I think part of the effort to try to attract black votes in this very highly contested mayoral race has led to that effort to talk about stop and frisk as a racial issue to try to bring in more and more black votes for that particular candidate.
Bill Thompson has really been working under the assumption from the beginning that he would get 70% of the black vote at least, and would really be his engine for success in this race. But we've seen Bill de Blasio hotly contest the black vote. Why do you think that Bill de Blasio has been able to connect with African American voters?
Because Bill's liberal, and that's part of the African American voter ethos. You also have the fact that he has an interracial marriage. His son and daughter are colored, they're black, and they're close to him, and he has an understanding as a parent of those issues, and as a parent and as a husband. But also, Bill Thompson has also been contested by, John Lew for the black vote. Because there were times I was joking early on in the campaign that John Lew was more black than Bill Thompson. You walk in a room and John Lew was getting a lot of black attention. It's now transferred a little bit over to de Blasio because of the situation that John is facing with the conviction of his treasurer and not getting CFB funds, and allegedly, according to polls, he's so far down the polls, black voters are gravitating to people who they think may have a chance of winning, that de Blasio and Bill Thompson.
But there was that sense with John Lew that he was kind of being persecuted by the establishment. Is that the kind of part of John Lew's appeal where he was kind of connecting with African American voters?
Part of the appeal, and also another thing that African American voters also have is this strange appeal for people who are persecuted, maybe because of our history of our own oppression in America. So you have a sense of moving towards and supporting those who have been oppressed in the sense of persecuted. Anthony Weiner, Elliot Spitzer, John Lew. I mean, the support for John Lew makes a little bit more sense than it does for Weiner and Spitzer.
Why do you think that black voters haven't been more eager to embrace Bill Thompson, and is that a sign that identity politics is on the decline in our city?
It's a sign that it's on the decline, that the black voters, in some aspects, a little more, sophisticated when it comes to not always voting for the black candidate immediately. It's also a sign, I think, as I said, tweeted out once, that black voters lie on polls, not wanting to give away what their thoughts are. But also, I think because John Lew and Bill de Blasio have actually talked to the issues that are important to African American voters. And Bill Thompson has come across as more middle of the road. Early on, he talked about not wanting to tax people. His opposition to stop and frisk was very nuanced, and so it could be missed by a great many people as to what he really was talking about. And so he has that issue. And then, of course, Bill de Blasio has been much more, vocal on hospital closures. And when you look at the demographic of hospital workers, many of them are black from the Caribbean. His wife is from the Caribbean, and he was vocal on that aspect. So for them, he's saving their jobs. While Bill Thompson hadn't been as vocal as Bill de Blasio had been on the hospital closures. So I think that's what hurt Bill somewhat. But I think on primary day, Bill will probably get over 50% of the black vote when people decide who they want to vote for that day.
Another thing that we've heard through our 5-borough series is that the Dante ad that Bill de Blasio put out has had a lot of resonance. What are your thoughts about the ad, and what have you kind of heard from the people that you know about their response to it?
I like the ad. I mean, you want to have candidates who have a personality, whose family can vouch for them. Yes, it helps that Dante is black and he could talk about stop and frisk, but I don't think he's being exploited by his father. I think I've heard that black women like the ad because it shows Bill as a father. He's loved by his son, and who doesn't want to have a husband who's loved by his son? Right? So you have that transference of good feelings. Then you hear from others who, for whatever the partisan reasons are, they don't like the fact that he's using, quote unquote, using his son to support him. Well, that's what I want my family to do. I want my family to be the first vouchers for me. So I don't have any problem with it. It's the right thing to do. And the kid's got a nice voice, and I think he's speaking from the heart.
This week is the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, which you've pointed out it wasn't just about racial equality, but was about income inequality and the war on poverty. And I was wondering if you think that Bill de Blasio has really surged in the polls because he has brought this question of a tale of two cities to the forefront.
Yeah, and I think unlike Freddie Ferrer, who brought it actually 12 years ago, 15 years ago, in 2001, 12 years ago, 2001, it's resonating more now because the income equality, I think, is much larger than it was in 2001. So it's working there. It's the anniversary of March on Washington having to do with jobs and freedom and dealing with economic inequality. And the fact is, Bill understands that it's not just minorities who are affected by the income inequality. It's white families who've seen a decline in their incomes, whether it's the loss in value of their homes, particularly for New Yorkers who've lost their homes because of Hurricane Sandy and seen the values drop. And so I think it's resonating there, the fact that he wants to tax the rich to pay their fair share for pre-K. So you have the populism that's there too. I think that's maybe part of it. I don't quite believe the Q poll that says he's at 36%. I think because they've left out Latinos, so we're not quite sure where they are. I think they're the real swing vote, and I think on election day they'll be the one, on primary day, they'll be the ones to determine who becomes, the Democratic nominee, at least who gets into the runoff.
Over the last 12 years, what changes have you seen in your old district in the Bronx? Have you seen this question of income inequality being the principal concern of your old constituents?
It's the top three will always be our jobs, housing, and education for one's child and for yourself if you want to advance. In the district, there's been a great deal of demographic change. I've seen many more West Africans in the district. You're seeing more Mexicans and fewer Puerto Ricans and maybe some more Dominicans. But their issues are all the same. It's jobs, it's housing, it's education for the children, having better schools. And that cuts across race and class in New York and boroughs.
Obviously, you are a member of the legislature. Now the Moreland Commission is probing the legislature. What do you think should be the goals of the Moreland Commission? What really needs to be their kind of fundamental approach to kind of ferreting out corruption en masse?
I'm not sure if the corruption exists in the campaign contributions. In my years, nobody's ever approached me and said, well, if you do X, you're getting a contribution. And I never really called anyone whose issue I supported asking for a contribution. I don't know what others do, but I don't think that's where the corruption exists. And people who've been convicted of corruption have not been individuals who actually have misused their campaign funds in that sense. They were convicted in the case of Pedro Espada for exploiting his nonprofit. In the case of others, it's tax evasion. It's not any real misuse of campaign funds or a quid pro quo. So I'm not quite sure exactly why they're going after campaign contributions. And if anybody ought to be worried about that, it ought to be the governor, given the committees to save New York, and many of the people who were his own contributors and those who wanted to influence state public policy contributed to the committee to save New York. And so you could sort of make that connection that they're doing it in an effort to try to curry favor with the governor. Those who've contributed to his $27 million campaign fund, you're giving a lot of money to a guy who really has no Republican opposition. You're doing it because you like his program or you want to influence him. So I think if anybody has to worry, it should be the governor. And the last time there was a similar modeling commission, they came back, the Perry Commission came back and bit Mario Cuomo on the butt when it came to his own campaign contributions.
Well, and that's what we've kind of seen with some of the scrutiny of the Moreland Commission members, and some of the stories that have been written about the governor recently. It's not so much that there's like this straight corruption, quid pro quo, but it's like the soft corruption, right? Whereas I give you campaign contributions and I'm building these relationships that translate into advantages for the people who give that money. And it doesn't even need to be explicit. It's almost baked into the system. Is that part of the problem?
It's part of me. Unless they're going to subpoena everybody's appointment book and then compare the appointment book to your campaign contributions and then what legislation comes out and how it affected whomever's clients. Yeah, but then it all becomes circumstantial unless you compel some testimony that says, well, I went to so-and-so because they said they were going to do X, Y, and Z based on a contribution, they're going to support my issue. I mean, the only real evidence we have, at least allegation, involves Eric Stevenson, my successor in the assembly, and the allegation that he was going to pass legislation to enable a Russian-owned adult daycare center to have a moratorium so nobody else can get into their territory. I mean, that was a quid pro quo that was explicit, according to the U.S. Attorney Baraha. But I don't know if that goes on elsewhere. No, it's like the other corrupt people who are just plain stupid and are not reflective of the great majority of the legislators who I think do a good job. You know, they get educated by lobbyists and then make up their own minds as to the merits of any sort of legislation.
Our viewers should YouTube the Diane Gordon video. That's one of my favorites, her soliciting a bribe. Lastly, I want to ask you, this has been a very tough year for the Assembly Speaker. Do you think that Shelley Silver is going to be reelected by his conference? Do you think that he will continue to lead the Assembly? I'm putting you on the spot.
$1 million question. I don't have a vote. I think Shelley is in real hot water. From what I'm hearing, members are upset. I'm told morale is the lowest that it's been in a long time because this latest allegation really reaches into the Shelley Silver inner circle. It's one thing to have a legislator from the Bronx or Brooklyn or from White Plains who's indicted, but it comes somebody who many people say you've been close to, who's the spouse of your chief of staff. That becomes a problem. And given the fact that those who think that the government may not want to go into 2014 campaign season with Shelley as the Assembly leader, and there are members who are concerned about that, their own reelection, folks upstate who are in competitive districts don't want to have the Shelley Silver albatross around their neck. So I believe something may happen end of the year, something may happen in early January to try to, I wouldn't call it a coup, but to seek a reasonable change in leadership to begin to change, I guess, the discussion and to really focus on legislative matters and on everybody's reelection in 2014 or election in 2014.
Do you think that Keith Wright would be the natural replacement for Shelley Silver?
Well, there are a number. I mean, Keith Wright is one of them. I've heard Deborah Glick. I've heard Helene Weinstein, Jeff Arbery. There are a number of people that are out there, and they're all competent. I happen to have Keith's a friend of mine, and it'd be nice to have your friends in leadership positions. It'd be nice to have an African American in leadership position. And Keith has a lot of good contacts. I mean, he knows almost everybody in the world. I think he would be good. I don't think he's actively campaigning for it, as some people have said. But I think he's somebody that the New York delegation could turn to as a leader, whether it's in 2014 or in 2015.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's it for this episode of Last Look. For more videos, please visit us on the web at cityandstateny.com.